Calling, 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 calling. Call the Growth Buster. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Welcome to the Growth Busters podcast, a service of the Growth Busters Project, finding the cure for growth addiction. On today's episode, is it macho to trash the planet? Am I less of a man if I behave sustainably? I'm Dave Gardner, Growth Buster in Chief here at the Growth Busters Project, and you're hearing laughter, so you know I'm not alone.
I'm Ben Bacher, a senior at Colorado College.
And I'm Caitlin Hickman, also a senior at Colorado College.
These guys make up the growth busting team. Thanks for joining me for this very interesting conversation that we're going to have. As you know, at Growth Busters here, we're in hot pursuit of charting a sustainable course for human civilization. And that means getting our population and economy sized appropriately so that future generations, like Ben and Caitlin, and even their children, should they choose to have any, have a chance to live decent lives on a planet with healthy life support systems. For cutting-edge information about our culture's unsustainable love affair with growth and what we can do about it, visit growthbusters.org. All right, Caitlin, what's the deal here? Why are we talking about masculinity and femininity today?
Yeah, so recently, the Scientific American published an article called Men Resist Green Behavior as Unmanly, a surprising reason for resistance to environmental goods and habits. And basically, they conducted a few different experiments relating to what men purchased and what they considered feminine or masculine in terms of environmental products.
Let me butt in here and say that that it was Aaron Brough, Associate Professor of Marketing at Utah State University, and James Wilkie, Assistant Professor of Marketing at Notre Dame, who performed the study. And in the show notes, we'll give you guys links to the Scientific American article. And I haven't checked, but I'm pretty sure we can find the study. It was published in another journal earlier, and we'll try to have a link to that as well. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. So I'll just read a little excerpt that summarizes the article. They showed that there is a psychological link between eco-friendliness and perceptions of femininity. Due to this green feminine stereotype, both men and women judged eco-friendly products, behaviors, and consumers as more feminine than their non-green counterparts. In one experiment, participants of both sexes described an individual who brought a reusable canvas bag to the grocery store as more feminine than someone who used a plastic bag, regardless of whether the shopper was a male or female. In another experiment, participants perceived themselves to be more feminine after recalling a time when they did something good versus bad for the environment. Yeah, what did you guys think of this article?
I was really sad and a little bit shocked, but once I read some of the details of the study, it sort of, I won't say it made sense, but I understood how this could be happening in our culture today. Disappointing, though.
Right.
What do you think?
Yeah, I was kind of in the same boat, I guess the degree to which it's happening, I was surprised, but to a large degree, I guess not that surprising, because I feel like I see that amongst my friends, that it's like being really green is kind of like a feminine, like a girly thing. I don't know. It's interesting to think about.
One of the first things I thought about was just the number of pickup trucks driving across America, that, how many of those big pickup trucks, gas hogs, are really necessary, and how many of them are just an expression of macho-ness.
Right. Well, and it makes me think a lot about, like, in movies, oftentimes like a really nerdy feminine guy it's a joke that they're like driving a Prius, and I feel like that's just such a common thing.
Right.
That it's like, oh, you're such a, I don't know.
Right. Yeah, one of the stereotypes that one of these articles talked about was the environmentalist is the hippie with like long flowing hair and a flower crown, and that's just not very manly. And that made me think about vegetarianism and femininity too, and how those two things are really linked. Like, if you're a man, you're supposed to order a steak and like your meats and eat them, and I think that's really problematic.
So I know you were a little upset by this, but I take it you weren't upset at Scientific American or even upset at these two marketers who did the study, but you're upset at humanity or what?
Well, I was upset at a couple of things. So one of the experiments entailed having male participants given a pink flowery gift card as a representation of a threat to their masculinity, and then had to decide between buying eco-friendly and regular items from a store with their gift card. And the participants were consistently found less likely to pick the eco-friendly product following the gender threat. But what frustrated me, I mean, aside from that in itself, was that the Scientific American article's response to this was, quote, "The idea that emasculated men try to reassert their masculinity through non-environmentally friendly choices suggests that in addition to littering, wasting water, or using too much electricity, one could harm the environment merely by making men feel feminine." And that frustrated me because I don't think that the onus of like men who are trying to reassert their masculinity through non-environmentally choices, like I think that those men are to blame for those choices, not like the rest of society for making them feel emasculated. Not that both components don't matter, but the way that I see the solution to this is, yeah, like changing the way that we view gender roles in our society and creating healthy masculinity instead of toxic masculinity,
Right.
and making men feel like it's okay to be feminine, not making men feel validated and making environmentalism suddenly this really, really manly thing.
Yeah, good point. And I thought it was interesting that it was pointed out, I think it was in the Scientific American story, if not, maybe one of the other magazines that did highlight this. I think there was a piece in Grist about this and one
The
other
Sydney
publication.
Morning Herald and Bust Magazine were, yeah.
Yeah, and Washington Post, actually. Washington Post, yeah. And that was that if men are secure in their masculinity, then they're not threatened by
Right.
these choices.
Right.
They're comfortable making these choices. So in a way, you know, if you're a macho man out there and you're busy, you know, making non-green choices in order to assert your masculinity, then basically that says you've got small hands. You know, you need to just sort of man up and be confident. You know, if it's important to you to be manly in some way, if you're confident about it, then you can drive a Prius. You
Right.
can take reusable grocery bags
Right.
into the grocery store.
And I think I wish they had addressed both like potential solutions in the article, because I feel like I agree. I think it would be much better if societally males were much more comfortable with with their masculinity. But on the other hand, that's kind of a much
Longer term solution.
Yeah, longer term solution. Kind of hard to like, how do we do that? Whereas like it seems like the Scientific American is proposing like a relatively straightforward like advertising campaign kind of.
Right. Yeah, I like the idea of a two-pronged solution.
But they just don't even acknowledge, they don't even present it as a problem, really, that like if you get a pink gift certificate, it like, I don't know.
Emasculates you.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the stories talked about how if you have a group called Friends of Nature, that you're going to have less appeal to men, so you need to call it Wilderness Rangers or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the stuff that you... Come on, let's get serious.
Right.
Let's get over it.
But it has an effect too, and both of these issues matter really deeply to me. So I really liked the conclusion of the article in the Sydney Morning Herald by Danielle Paquette. She concluded by saying marketers are unlikely to shatter gender expectations overnight or nix the belief that feminine is lesser, but a packaging or messaging tweak could draw more men to the green movement. Despite a prevalent stereotype that green consumers are more feminine than non-green consumers, the researchers wrote, we show that men's inhibitions about engaging in green behavior can be mitigated through masculine affirmation and masculine branding. And she proposes, both like rebranding some environmental products and educating people about environmentalism and gender roles. And breaking down that binary a little bit.
Huh. I wonder, I don't recall reading in the article, but is there any reverse effect? Like, are women less likely to join they'd be less likely to join Wilderness Rangers? Does it say that?
In the 3 articles that I read, women, regardless of branding, would
really
choose, I think.
Well, it does seem like societally that's kind of like in general, women who wear men's clothing like aren't as stigmatized as men who wear women's clothing. So
because femininity is seen as a weakness, like women aren't going to be penalized for taking on masculine traits as much as men are penalized for taking on feminine traits.
Right.
That's just that's mind-boggling and fascinating at the same time. Yeah, it is true. For some reason, once again, the women are just a little. I'm going to just say a little ahead of us guys. they're a little more mature. It's not that big a deal
Yeah.
to a woman. They're not so threatened by it, and that's kind of sad. But that makes me want to maybe consider broadening the conversation a little bit, because I found myself thinking about, okay, well, what are masculine values or traits, and what are feminine values and traits? Because it's, without thinking about it much, I've, for the last several years, been giving an awful lot of credit to women and saying it's too bad that we men hadn't stepped out of the way and let women be in charge of the planet. We'd probably be a whole lot better off. And we all know that if women around the world are free to make their own decisions about their reproductive patterns, about their family size, about when they start conceiving children, or if they conceive children and how many, that they generally make better environmental decisions about that. They'll tend to choose fewer children. It's the men in these more patriarchal societies that really push for 5, 7, 9, 12 kids as a sign of, here we go, masculinity. So there's this kind of unexamined assumption I've been running on, which is that there's something inherently good about feminine values, or better than male values. I hope that we men could be detached from them, that we could change that. Because I made a list for myself this morning of, okay, so what does it mean to be masculine? You're going to find they're competitive. They're really driven by success. They're dominant. They're assertive. Whereas feminine values on my list were cooperative, empathetic, caring, more relationship-oriented. And those are all, those feminine values really do give us a better planet, don't you think? A better society, a better block, a better city, a better nation, a better world.
But I think something that's important for me to understand as well is, like, I feel like for a lot of my life, I kind of thought those values were kind of inherent to maleness and femaleness. And I think it's kind of important to understand that at least some of all of them are socially constructed, kind of, just because I think for me that makes it easier to, well, and I think a lot of the pushback you get from that is that males are just naturally, like, as a biological species, are dominant and are the competitive and aggressive, and so it's not natural to be cooperative. And I disagree with that. I think perhaps there's some inclination to be more aggressive in men, but I think the degree to which it's played out in society, I think, is really over exaggerated.
Yeah, I think there's some instinctive truth there, but I think as we have evolved, I think that we have less and less of that, don't you think?
Yeah, well, and I think the interesting thing about that too is that one could very easily make the argument that we have branded, like we have created through advertising, the binary between genders and between masculinity and femininity. So it's interesting that, like, the solution to this problem is to brand environmental products as more masculine, when the idea of masculinity, one could say, is invented by advertising and by the way that we validate people through their gender. Definitely
perpetuated.
Right.
Yeah. Maybe not invented, but I think they saw something and they took advantage of it. And I think they perpetuated it, just like advertising perpetuates, and all the media messaging perpetuates our chasing after growth.
Right.
You know?
Well, so say you were an advertising mogul. If we view it as that advertising is powerful, what campaign would you recommend to?
I'm so glad you asked. I'm glad you asked that question, Ben.
That's a really good question. I don't know, because I don't know. Because I think that where this solution comes from me, not that I wouldn't support people, branding environmental products as more masculine or more gender neutral than they supposedly have been, even though I think that most of the eco-friendly products I've seen have been branded as pretty gender neutral. I feel like they tend to be like blue and green, or like earth tone colors and like pretty simple text. I haven't seen very many pink environmental products.
Right.
But I guess, if we were to coat everything in black, and I don't know what would attract men to be more eco-friendly, but I feel like for me, the solution really comes from redefining what masculinity is.
But I guess it's an impossible question to answer. But if you're taking that, trying to do that as an advertising mogul,
I would have to think about that. I mean,
I think we have the makings of a really great Saturday Night Live sketch here.
Well, I think you could do something with celebrity power. I
Right.
think, like, if you could find a celebrity who's very well respected and possibly generally thought of as very masculine. I'm trying to think. I feel like there's
Like the Ron Swanson, Nick Offerman.
yeah. Do you think he's? I don't know what the advertisement would look like, but something about them, like, I don't know, doing something that's not typically masculine or something. I don't know.
Yeah, and validating
yeah,
it.
Right,
and
right.
I think that there are organizations that are already working really hard to produce media that does that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, like the Representation Project comes to mind for sure. And they have campaigns that are based around male celebrities kind of demonstrating what healthy masculinity can look like and that it doesn't need to be a binary. But yeah, I think it would be really interesting to connect traits that have been deemed more feminine to environmentalism, which is the thing that I think a lot of men do theoretically care about, like would list it on their political causes, and to validate traits based on their worth for the environment, like cooperation. Like if you independence has been deemed, a really, really masculine trait, but the idea that we rely on the earth is, that comes from a more cooperative mindset, and the idea that we can't just do this as individuals. So I feel like, taking the idea that if you want to save the planet, maybe you should embrace cooperation as a trait that you wouldn't have thought is masculine enough.
Well, and it's interesting that it seems kind of like, not to call you out, Dave, but it kind of seems like an intermediate step of like what you were saying before of like that it's like to be feminine is to like man up and kind of like embrace your masculinity. And so it's kind of like that there's this intermediate step of like being feminine is masculine as opposed to like before, like, I don't know, kind of like not necessarily having cooperation have to be, I don't know, a feminine or masculine trait.
Yeah, that's where we ultimately need to go.
Right.
It is tempting to sort of have some fun with this and do I can envision a public service announcement with Arnold Schwarzenegger where he's getting out of a Prius and he's carrying a little reusable bag into the grocery store and says, "I'm a girly man," and that's fine with me.
Yeah.
But you brought up politics, and it's interesting. The person who is U.S. president, at least this week still, has not been pushing cooperation, has been pushing competition, and coincidentally has really been pushing
Nuclear warfare.
Yeah, and nothing green, but basically pillage the planet. Mm-hmm. Does it make you wonder whether he's like the perfect focus group for this study?
Yes. I for such a long time have thought that Trump is the embodiment of toxic masculinity. Like,
of course, yeah.
His picture should be under, but I just think about, his tweet talking about having a bigger and more functional button. Like, that is just the definition. Like, that combines everything that we're talking about. It's literally a dick measuring competition that in the process of him trying to assert his masculinity, he's like risking nuclear warfare, which is trashing the environment because his masculinity is more important.
Well, do you think his Raid the Environment policies are the result of him thinking that that's masculine? I'd just been assuming it's just because he's chasing the dollar and he thinks all of his buddies get rich if they can raid the environment.
Yeah, well, I think that that's a really interesting point because I think another masculine trait is having money. Like, a way to validate masculinity is through wealth and success. And so I think whether he's like more financially oriented or trying to validate his own I don't think you would have to pick between those two. I think
Not
it's
that
definitely
different.
both.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think you can make an argument as well that a lot of people voted for him as a reaffirmation of masculinity, kind of. I don't know, just because I feel like in the fair amount of the articles I've read about like talking with Trump voters and trying to understand them, it's like a kind of fear of that the old way of things are kind of changing, and that like a more progressive view, and that maybe that like a more equitable way is kind of taking control, and that's kind of scary if your whole life is built around that kind of masculinity. I don't know.
Yeah, super scary.
Right. Even
Definitely.
for women as well. I don't know.
I think I've confessed before on a previous episode that I have been driving SUVs for a lot of my adult life, that as soon as my family had children, that I didn't want to have a minivan. That was not masculine. I wanted an SUV was the masculine version of a minivan, and guilty that I wanted this more masculine vehicle. And of course, now I much more often drive a Prius. We do have an SUV that we try to never drive. In fact, we just put gas in it the other day and looked at our records, and it had been more than 2 months since we had gassed it up, which is pretty good. But anyway, so now what I'm confessing is that I've been a participant in this status consumption, and maybe do you think you two
definitely
participate in that?
Literally, I think it's impossible to escape it.
Yeah,
that's too bad.
No, I think everyone is complicit in it to some extent.
But I think it's safe to assume you two are less complicit than me, because I got the worst of the brainwashing. I think society is moving forward. We're making a little bit of progress, so you don't have the worst of it. But now, my status consumption, I benefit from the same thing with the Prius, because most of the people that I go visit, most of the meetings I go to now, if they see my car parked out in front of the coffee shop where I'm having a meeting, or in front of the community center where I'm attending a meeting or something like that, I want them to see the Prius. I don't want them to see the SUV.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the kind of people that I surround myself with, are people who wouldn't be impressed. In fact, they would be unimpressed with the SUV.
Right.
And so I'm gaining status by making sure I show up in the Prius, and losing status if I'm seen in the SUV. I should keep it a secret, and here I have confessed that we've got one. It's not a Hummer, at least. So I think we can and we should use our need for peer approval. We could use that to our benefit in this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is definitely like trying to affirm like people who are willing to show like femininity kind of and affirm that while not vilifying people who like, I don't know, because it's no one chooses really to be a product of toxic masculinity. So I don't know. Yeah, it's an interesting thing.
Right. Yeah. If making environmentalism cool went hand in hand with making femininity cool and validating people's feminine qualities, that would be wonderful. Rather than just, there was also an article in Bust magazine by Gianna Foles, and she was just joking about how this could spiral, ending up with all of the garbage cans in America being painted pink, so the masculine men will go to the obviously more manly green recycling bins. Yeah, and I thought that was funny.
Carrying that a bit to extreme, but we certainly could if we had the right role models. I think there's a lot of power in that if we can get all kinds of noted, respected, and celebrity role models doing the right thing, and so that would mean some of the most masculine, macho movie stars out there, if they're driving Priuses or walking, riding bike, taking the bus, and choosing to have just one child instead of 5, 6, or 8, others will follow, or at least think about that and say, I wonder why they're doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we can take advantage of it, but won't it be nice if we can ever hit the day where we're just all secure enough that we can embrace the values that just are the right values, the best values, the most fulfilling and meaningful. And
I think that would be a great advertising campaign for the idea of healthy masculinity, is just because it is just embracing the best in yourself to the fullest, not, don't let yourself be limited by your gender box. Embrace what you actually think is right, like seeing it as an opportunity for self-growth.
Man, I think you're inventing a whole new campaign, a whole new movement.
We should quit Growth Busters. Advertisers.
This could be big. Maybe someone out there may be working on this. They're bound to be, but that could be pretty interesting.
Gender Busters.
There you go. The genesis of Gender Busters, and you heard it here first on the Growth Busters podcast. I love it. I love it.
A multi-million-dollar corporation next year.
Sounds like some real healthy masculinity you got going there, Ben.
It is. I think so.
Well, that moves us into that time of the episode that everyone's always looking forward to, because we trip all over ourselves with our trying to make sure we don't repeat ourselves, and that's lightening the load, where we just share something quirky or not quirky, something masculine or feminine, but something green, some way that we try to lighten our load on the planet. What have you got for us today, Ben?
Yeah, so I was thinking of mine this week, and I was reminded of a time when I went to the grocery store with a friend a couple weeks ago, and I was going to get some vegetables, and so I just got some carrots and just put them in the cart, and my friend was shocked, and she was just thought it was really weird and that it was really unsanitary. But it's like you wash your vegetables anyways, you know. So yeah, that was mine this week. Of just you don't necessarily need a bag to put your carrots or your peppers in. You can just put them in the cart, and you're gonna rinse them anyways. So
Yay!
I don't know, save a bag.
I love it.
It kills me to see individually like plastic shrink wrapped sweet potatoes. They grow in the dirt. People need to know that they grow in the dirt.
Yeah. Are you inspired yet, or do you need me to go, Caitlin?
I'm inspired.
What have you got?
Yeah, I'm going to connect it to our earlier conversation because I think that I'm really glad we talked about this, because I think it's an intersection that people don't usually think about. But one thing I wanted to throw out is that we had this whole conversation in very gender binary terms, and I think that an act that people would not have ever thought of as environmentally friendly, but that I think environmental activists should hop on, is validating the identities of non-gender binary and transgender people, because they're serving as really great role models for, embracing who they actually are and incorporating both masculine and feminine qualities in the way that seems most honest to them. And continually people mess up people's pronouns if they're non-gender binary. And I think that it's an area that a lot of environmental activists maybe haven't read that much about because they don't seem to intersect that much. But when you think about our conversation today, those two things do overlap.
I really wish you hadn't brought that up, because I really think you've just alienated all of the cowboys and roughnecks that listen to our podcast.
Probably. I'm not trying to alienate you.
Well,
You're welcome in
Cowboys
this
Just
space.
throwing out another gender binary comment here. No, I think that's a good point. I think you might remember, I think it might have been our last episode where I talked about taking my reusable cup with me on a trip and going through airports and handing that to the barista at the coffee shop and asking for my coffee in that, and then crying in my coffee because they made my coffee in a disposable cup and then poured that into my reusable cup, completely negating the value of carrying that cup around. Well, I have another coffee one today. A little bit similar, but different enough to qualify, I think. And that is, let's say you're going into a coffee shop and you're going to sit there and visit with a friend or have a business meeting or something like that. Most coffee shops, I don't know what the percentage of, but I'd say more than 50% of the coffee shops out there do have ceramic mugs in-house. They do not only serve coffee in disposable cups. So you have that option of getting your coffee in one of their mugs that they will then wash and reuse. And the common, tell me if you guys use this language, I think I'm as cool as they come. And that is, if you don't want a disposable cup, you say, I want a venti non-fat, no-whip mocha for here. You say, you order your coffee for here, which means I'm going to drink it here. So please don't put it in a disposable cup. Do you guys say for here? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay. So ordering your coffee for here, if you're going to stay and you don't need to walk out the door with your coffee, if you forgot to bring your own cup, then if you order it for here, then you don't get a disposable cup.
I have a great linguistic problem with that, though. It's the worst when you're trying to like call in, but you want to eat there. I always have so much trouble because saying for here doesn't make sense because I'm not there. So I always just say like 4 sentences trying to describe what I want.
For over there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's pretty funny, Ben. But so here's a pet peeve about that. I don't know why, if you don't say for here, have you ever had a barista ask you, do you want it in a mug? No.
At local coffee shops.
Not at Starbucks.
But not at
Or
Starbucks.
anything.
So I think that's a really important tip.
Starbucks,
Yeah,
right,
it would be nice if more of them,
Yeah.
asked.
Right.
More and more, I'm being asked if I want a bag when I buy,
that's
one
true.
product. Thankfully,
So nice.
Well, that's I love in Santa Cruz now. It's 10 cents a bag, and I think that's just great. Just because it's like that's a small enough barrier that it's not really that prohibitive. But I think even just putting a tiny little fee on something makes it, you just kind of think, you're like, oh, I don't actually need a bag for my mac and cheese, I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
We should have something like that in Colorado
We're all
Springs.
stingy enough that we would, that would be just enough
Yeah,
to make people
definitely.
reevaluate.
Right.
Even some cowboys and roughnecks, probably.
Probably. We need to have one on our show.
do.
Well, that brings us to the close of another rousing rendition of Growth Busters. Don't forget to explore issues at growthbusters.org. Check out our analysis of pro-growth bias in the media at growthbiasbusted.org. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks. Bye.
Some may dream to pave mountains and streams, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Some may just want more, but don't know what it's for, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Don't want a solution at the cost of pollution. They think bigger is better at the cost of the weather. But no, not us. We are the growth busters. Calling, 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 calling. Call the growth busters.